The nights in my neighborhood have a charm that no city could ever match. By the time the sun slips behind a line of houses in the final call, the prayer fades into the distance. A gentle calm settles over everything. The air feels softer, touched with the scent of damp soil and blooming jasmine that lingers from the small gardens people keep outside their gates. The narrow lanes glow under the faint orange light of the street lamps, their halos catching the occasional drift of dust in the breeze. Most people retreat indoors after dinner, their voices reduced to muffled murmurs through open windows. The world becomes quieter, slower, as if the night itself is stretching out lazily, giving us all room to breathe. I've always liked walking at this hour. It's when the air feels cool against my skin, when the sound of my footsteps echoes gently off the walls of the lane. And if I'm lucky, it's the time I might catch a glimpse of him. My neighbor, well, more than just a neighbor in my eyes, is the kind of person who draws attention without even trying. He's tall, with the kind of easy, relaxed posture that makes him look like he has all the time in the world. His hair is thick, dark, and always a little messy, like he's just run his fingers through it instead of bothering with a comb. In the daytime, the sun seems to find reasons to catch on the warm brown of his skin. But at night, it's the curve of his smile that lights him up. His eyes, sharp and playful, have a habit of catching mine before I'm ready, and it's in those moments I feel like I've been caught doing something I shouldn't, even when I'm just standing there. I've known him for a while, but not in the way I wish I did. Mostly, we've exchanged those casual neighborhood pleasantries, passing each other by and offering a polite nod or a quick hello if we're in the right mood. But over time, those little exchanges grew into something warmer. I'd see him struggle with his phone, and I'd help him sort it out. Once, I helped him set up his new router, and he made a joke about how I was the tech department of the street. I laughed it off, but that's when I gave him my Wi-Fi password, half as a favor, half as an excuse to have a reason to talk to him again. It's strange how something so simple can feel so personal. Every time I see him on his phone at night, leaning against the low wall outside his house, I wonder if he's using my internet. Sometimes he even shouts across the lane, teasing, "Signal's weak today. Is it because you're mad at me?" That's the thing about him. He makes small talk feel like a secret between the two of us. I've caught myself noticing little quirks about him that no one else probably cares about. The way he tilts his head when he's listening to someone, how he tucks his hands into his pockets when he's trying not to fidget, the way his laughter sometimes comes in short bursts like he's trying to hold it back. These are small things, but they stick with me. And yet, despite all this familiarity, we've never really had much time alone. Someone's always around, neighbors passing by, kids playing cricket in the lane, his father calling for him to do some chore. I've wondered, more than once, what it would be like to talk to him without all the interruptions, to just have a piece of time that belonged to the two of us. That night, the air was even cooler than usual, the breeze carrying the faint clink of metal from the goat pen in his yard. I was out walking, more out of habit than purpose, though if I'm being honest, there was a part of me hoping to see him. My mind had been wandering, imagining conversations we might have, the easy rhythm of his voice mixing with the stillness of the night. I thought about how rare those moments were, and how, if I got the chance, I wouldn't waste it. The streets were quiet, shadows stretching across the ground from the low walls and the occasional tree. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and then fell silent again. My heart had that restless feeling, like it was waiting for something to happen, though I couldn't name what. I remember thinking that if the night stayed as calm as this, I'd probably just take a slow lap around a block and go home. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. It was him. I recognized his walk immediately, unhurried, shoulders slightly forward, as if he didn't have to prove anything to anyone. He was coming from the goat pen, a small plastic container in his hand. Even from a distance, I could make out the faint curve of the smile playing on his lips, the relaxed way he carried himself. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be just another night. Something inside me, something reckless, was already taking root. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I wanted to do something. Something that might give me more than a passing smile or a short joke about Wi-Fi. That was the moment I slipped quietly into the alley, my heart drumming in my chest. The night was at its most peaceful when I caught sight of him again. The air was cool enough to make me want to pull my hands into my sleeves, but not so cold that it was uncomfortable. The dim streetlights gave the lane that soft, hazy glow, like the world had been wrapped in a quiet filter. Somewhere nearby, a goat shifted and knocked against the wooden frame of its pen, the sound carrying clearly in the stillness. A few crickets were chirping lazily in the background, their rhythm blending with the occasional rustle of leaves when a breeze slipped through. That's when I saw him, stepping out his gate with that familiar, easy walk. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and loose pajama pants, the kind of thing that made him look even more effortlessly handsome. In one hand, he carried a small container, glancing down at it as if to make sure it was the right one before heading toward the goat pen. Even from where I stood, I could make out the faint curve of his profile in the streetlight. Strong jaw, hair a little messy from the wind, his steps unhurried like he had nowhere else to be. I don't know what came over me, but a strange rush of energy ran through me. Maybe it was the way the night wrapped around us, or maybe it was the fact that it had been too long since we'd spoken without people around. All I knew was that I wanted this moment to be mine. I wanted to create something memorable out of an otherwise ordinary night. Instead of just waiting for him to walk past, I moved quietly into the narrow alley between two houses. The shadows that were deep enough to hide me, the smell of damp bricks and earth sharp in my nose. My pulse quickened, not in fear, but in the thrill of doing something unexpected. I could hear his footsteps growing closer, steady and calm, the sound bouncing faintly off the walls. My mind raced with anticipation, playing out how he might react. Would he be startled? Would he laugh? Would he stand there confused until he realized it was me? The seconds felt longer as he drew near. I pressed my back against the wall, peeking just enough to see the top of his head as he approached. Every sound seemed sharper, the faint scrape of his sandal against the ground, the small clink of the container in his hand, the soft exhale of his breath in the cool air. And then he was there. Without giving myself time to think, I stepped out from the shadows and reached for him. My hand caught his wrist first, and before he could react, I pulled him toward me in a playful but firm grip. He froze for a fraction of a second, his body tense in surprise. I could feel the quick jerk of his muscles, the instinctive reaction to being caught off guard. His eyes widened, his breath hitching, until recognition flashed in his face. "You!" he started, but the rest of his words dissolved into a startled laugh. The corners of his mouth curved up, and the tension melted into something lighter. His shoulders loosened, and he shook his head as if to scold me, though there was nothing serious in his expression. "You nearly gave me a heart attack," he said, but his voice carried that familiar warmth, threaded with amusement. I grinned, still holding onto his wrist. "You were taking too long. I thought I'd speed things up." He glanced around, as if checking if anyone had seen, and then looked back at me with a faint spark in his eyes. "And this is how you speed things up? By ambushing me in the dark." "It worked, didn't it?" I said, my tone light, but my pulse still racing. He laughed again, softer this time, like he was trying to keep it between us. His hand relaxed in mine, and he tilted his head slightly, studying me in that way that made me feel like he could read more than I wanted to show. "You're lucky I like you," he said finally. The words hung there in the air for a moment, simple but heavier than they should have been. My grip on his wrist loosened, but I didn't let go right away. I didn't want to. "I know," I replied, letting a small smile slip onto my face. The night felt different now, more alive. The quiet wasn't just background anymore. It felt like a blanket wrapping around the two of us, shutting out the rest of the world. I could still hear the goat shifting in its pen, the low creak of wood, but it all felt distant compared to the steady rhythm of his breathing so close to mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. His eyes held mine, curious, maybe even a little amused, but softer than I'd ever seen them before. Then, with a small shake of his head, he chuckled under his breath. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the lane. "Walk with me." And just like that, we fell into step together, the space between us smaller than it had been before. My heart was still beating faster than it should, but it wasn't from nerves anymore. It was from the way his shoulder occasionally brushed mine, from the warmth in his voice when he spoke, from the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something different. We didn't rush anywhere. The lane ahead was empty, and the night felt too good to waste. The air was cool on my face, carrying that faint mix of smoke and damp earth. I could hear our footsteps on the uneven stones, a slow, unhurried rhythm, like we had all the time in the world. "So," he began, giving me a sidelong look, "is this your new hobby now? Hiding in alleys and attacking people in the dark?" I grinned. "Only people I like." He laughed, really laughed this time, the sound spilling easily into the quiet night. "Good to know I'm on the VIP list." Then, "Still, you almost made me drop the container." He lifted it slightly for emphasis. "Do you have any idea how annoyed my father would be if I spilled this?" I shrugged, still smiling. "You didn't drop it, though. That's what matters." "Yeah, because I have quick reflexes," he said, a teasing edge in his tone. "If I were anyone else, you'd be cleaning goat food off the ground right now." "You're welcome for keeping your skills sharp," I shot back. He shook his head but couldn't hide his smile. "You're impossible." We kept walking, our voices carrying lightly between us. At some point, his arm brushed against mine, and neither of us pulled away. It was subtle, but enough to make me aware of how close we were. "You know," he said after a moment, "you've been making my nights more interesting lately." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Well, for one, free Wi-Fi," he said with mock seriousness, then cracked a grin. I groaned. "So that's it? That's all I'm good for? A walking internet connection?" "Not just that," he said quickly, like he didn't want to take it the wrong way. "I mean, okay, yes, the Wi-Fi's a huge perk. But also," he hesitated for a moment, eyes flicking toward the ground before coming back to me, "it's nice knowing you're around. Even if we're not talking, just knowing you're there." The way he said it made my chest feel warm, like something small but important had just been placed in my hands. "Well," I said, try and keep my voice light, "I guess I'll keep you on the password list then." "That's very generous of you," he said with exaggerated gratitude. "I'll try not to overuse it too much." We laughed again, the sound blending easily with the soft noises of night. The houses we passed stood silent, their windows dark, except for the occasional flicker of a TV screen. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice, and then fell quiet again. Neither of us made any move toward home. Our steps slowed naturally, as if both of us were trying to stretch the walk as much as we could. "So," I said after a while, "what's in the container?" "Just some feed for the goat," he replied. "Father's been reminding me all evening to take it out there. I forgot until just now." "Good thing you remembered," I said, "or I wouldn't have had the chance to terrify you tonight." "You're proud of that, aren't you?" he asked, glancing at me with a mock-accusing look. "Maybe," I admitted. "You looked funny when you were startled." Yeah, he muttered, but there was no heat in his voice. In fact, he was smiling again. We reached a quieter stretch of the lane, where the streetlights were farther apart. The shadows between them seemed deeper, the glow softer. We slowed even more without saying anything about it. "You know," he said suddenly, "it's not just the Wi-Fi. I actually do enjoy hanging out with you." I glanced at him. "Is this your big confession of the night?" He chuckled. "I guess so. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? We've been neighbors for ages, but we only really started talking a few months ago. And now, I feel like I can tell you things I wouldn't tell just anyone." "Like what?" I asked. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Small stuff, mostly. Things about my day, my family, even things that annoy me. You don't make a big deal about it. You just listen. That's rare." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. There was a quiet sincerity in his voice that caught me off guard. "Well," I said eventually, "I like listening to you, so that works out." He smiled, the kind of smile that felt unguarded. "Good, because I've got more to share." We ended up wandering a little farther than usual, talking about things that didn't really matter but somehow felt important in the moment. Funny little stories from when he was younger, how he once tried to build a kite from scratch and it ended up tangled in a tree before it even flew, how his father still reminds him of it when they argue. I told him about the time I accidentally left my phone on the roof of my house after taking pictures of the sunset and only realized hours later. The more we talked, the more the night seemed to shrink around us, like we were the only two people awake in the whole neighborhood. Every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me for a second longer than necessary, and I couldn't help but wonder if he was thinking the same thing I was, that this was better than anything either of us had planned for the evening. When we finally stopped walking, we were standing under one of the dimmer streetlights. He shifted the container to his other hand and leaned lightly against the wall beside us. "You know what's funny?" he said, looking up at the night sky. "I didn't even want to come outside tonight. I was tired, but now I'm glad I did." I felt the same, though I didn't say it right away. Instead, I looked at him, the soft light catching the edges of his face, and said quietly, "Me too." We stayed there for another moment, letting the silence stretch, comfortable and easy. Somewhere behind us, the goat made a soft bleating sound, but neither of us moved. The night wasn't over yet. Not for us. We were mid-laugh, him teasing me about how I once tripped over my own slippers, when the night broke with a sharp voice cutting through the stillness. "Arif, Jawdy Wappies A.O." It was his father, the tone carrying that mix of impatience and authority that leaves no room for misunderstanding. The call bounced off the quiet walls of the lane, louder than it needed to be in the sleepy silence. I felt him stiffen for just a second, the sound catching him mid-smile. His laughter faded into a pause, and for a brief moment, his eyes flicked toward the direction of a voice. That was the moment I expected him to say, "I should go," and start walking away, but he didn't. Instead, he took a small breath, glanced back at me, and said with a grin, "He can wait a bit." The warmth that spread through me was almost immediate. It was such a simple choice, nothing dramatic, nothing said in grand words, but meant more than I could explain in that instant. He wasn't in a hurry to leave. Not when we still had a little night left between us. "You sure?" I asked, keeping my tone casual even though inside I was already smiling far too much. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady but soft. "We're talking. I'll go in a little while." He shifted the container in his hand and glanced around, as if checking the street again. The sound of his father's footsteps didn't follow, and the lane stayed quiet after that one call. Still, we both knew it would be better to move out of earshot. "Come on," he said, tilting his head toward the far end of the street. "Let's go somewhere quieter." I followed without hesitation. We walked past a couple of shuttered shops and down a narrower path where the streetlights didn't quite reach. The glow from the main lane faded behind us, replaced by a softer darkness. The air felt cooler here, touched with the faint smell of wet leaves. We found a spot near the edge of the neighborhood, where a low wall overlooked a patch of open ground, the kind of place that felt hidden, even though it wasn't far from home. He set the container down on the wall, not even glancing at it anymore. "This is better," he said, leaning back slightly and looking up at the sky. No one to interrupt. I leaned against the wall, too, letting the quiet settle between us for a moment. From here, we could hear the distant hum of a motorbike somewhere far off, and the soft rustle of trees in the breeze. "Your dad's going to wonder what's taking you so long," I said after a while. "He always wonders," he replied with a shrug. "I'll tell him I ran into you. He won't ask too many questions." "Why is that?" "Because he knows you helped me with stuff," he said, glancing at me with a playful smirk. "Phones, routers, life in general." I laughed. "So I'm your neighborhood problem solver now." "You're my neighborhood something," he said, letting the words hang there just long enough for me to notice. The way he looked at me then, steady, unhurried, made the air between us feel different, lighter, but also somehow charged. It was a kind of moment that didn't need to be filled with words. And yet he kept talking, his voice lower now, more thoughtful. "You know," he said, "most people I talk to, it's just small talk, safe stuff. With you, it feels different. I don't have to think too hard about what I say." I smiled faintly, my gaze drifting to the ground before I looked back at him. "That's because you know I'm not judging you." "Exactly," he said, nodding. "And I don't get that a lot." The honesty in his voice caught me again, just like it had earlier. I realized then that I wasn't just glad he'd chosen to stay, because it meant more time for me. I was glad because it meant this time mattered to him, too. We stayed there a while longer, our conversation softer now, more personal. He told me about how he sometimes felt like his father still saw him as a kid, even though he was grown. I told him about the way I felt restless sometimes, like I was waiting for something to happen, but didn't know what. It wasn't heavy talk, but it wasn't the kind of thing you share with just anyone either. When a cooler breeze swept through, he shifted a little closer, almost without realizing it. I could feel the faint warmth of him beside me, the quiet, steady rhythm of his presence. Somewhere behind us in the distance, his father's voice called again, less sharp this time, almost resigned. Arif sighed, glancing back toward the sound, then turned to me with a smile that was both amused and reluctant. I should go soon, he said, but not yet. And so we stayed. We found a spot away from the noise of the house, far enough that his father's voice would never quite reach us again. The sun was lowering in the sky now, sending those honey gold beams across the yard. We wandered without much plan, but his steps slowed near the old neem tree at the edge of the goat pen. Its shade spread wide and cool, the kind that invited you to sit and forget time. The goats were lazing in the warm dust, their occasional bleats fading into the background. A soft breeze stirred the leaves above, and the light dappled across his face. I could see him relax in this quiet, the tension from earlier slipping away. At first, our conversation stayed where it had been, tossing little jokes back and forth, teasing each other in ways that carried no weight. But something in the air shifted. Maybe it was the calm of this place, or the fact that neither of us felt rushed anymore. His voice grew softer, not shy exactly, but more careful, as if the words mattered now. He told me about his dreams, not the kind you confess to impress someone, but the real ones you admit only when you feel safe. Some were simple, fixing up his father's land, maybe starting a small shop in town. Others carried a kind of fragile hope, the sort you don't want to say too loudly in case they vanish. He admitted he sometimes felt the world was too big, too quick, and that he worried about being left behind. I listened, not just hearing the words, but catching the pauses, the sighs, the way his eyes wandered the horizon when he didn't want me to see the weight in them. When he stopped, I found myself sharing things I rarely told anyone. Not just facts, but feelings, the quiet fears I carried about trust, about finding someone who could see me without the mask I so often wore. I told him how I value companionship that wasn't bound by expectations, the kind that let two people exist side by side without always needing to fill the air with words. We sat under that tree for what must have been a long time, our legs stretched out, backs leaning against the rough bark. Now and then, the breeze would push a strand of hair into my face, and I'd catch him watching me before he looked away. It wasn't an intense stare, more like a soft, unguarded glance, as if he was quietly memorizing the way I was in that moment. There were stretches where neither of us spoke. At first, I wondered if I should fill the silence, but then I realized I didn't want to. His presence beside me was enough. In those wordless moments, it felt like we'd stepped into a space where nothing needed to be proven. He shifted once, close enough that our shoulders brushed. It was such a small thing, but my heart caught on it. His nearness wasn't demanding. It simply was. I leaned back into the tree, feeling the roughness against my spine, the sun's fading warmth on my skin, and the steady rhythm of him breathing beside me. We watched the goats wander lazily in the pen, their bells jingling now and then. A young one tried to climb a small rock, stumbling twice before managing it. He chuckled softly, and I found myself smiling just because he did. At one point, he picked up a small stick and began tracing lines in the dirt, absently sketching patterns. I noticed there were shapes that connected, circles inside circles, overlapping paths. I didn't ask him what they meant. I think we both like leaving some things unsaid. As the light began to fade, I felt an odd, quiet happiness growing in me. Not the kind that bursts with excitement, but the steady, warm kind that settles deep in your chest. It wasn't just that we were talking more openly. It was that, here in this peaceful corner, it felt like we had stepped into each other's inner worlds and been welcomed in without hesitation. When he finally looked at me again, there was something in his expression I hadn't seen before. A softness, yes, but also a quiet recognition, as if he, too, realized that this moment was no longer just a passing afternoon. And in that fading light, with the sound of distant voices far away and the smell of earth and leaves all around us, I understood that some connections don't need grand gestures. Sometimes they grow best in the quiet, in the spaces between words, in the comfort of simply being. The air between us felt lighter after our long, winding talk. We had gone from teasing jokes to sharing pieces of ourselves we didn't normally hand out so easily. And now, in the quiet that followed, every sound seemed sharper. The faint rustle of leaves, the soft hum of the night. I caught him glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Not the casual, passing kind of glance, but one that lingered like he was memorizing something he didn't want to forget. I laughed at something small, a goat in the pen bleeding at absolutely nothing, as a demand in the world's attention. He joined in, shaking his head, but when the laughter died down, he didn't look away. "You know," he started, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "I enjoy spending time with you, probably more than you think." It wasn't a dramatic confession, but it landed in me like a drop of warm honey, slow and sweet. My smile froze for a second, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to hold a moment still. I tilted my head, meeting his eyes. "More than I think, huh?" He chuckled, but didn't answer right away. "Yeah, you've got this way of making the world feel less heavy." Something shifted in me then. This wasn't just two people killing time on a quiet evening. This was something else, something that mattered. We sat there for a while without speaking, the silence not awkward but comforting, like an unspoken agreement that we didn't need to fill every space with words. I felt the cool night breeze brush past us, carrying the faint smell of hay and earth. It hit me that the night had stopped being ordinary long ago, somewhere between the laughter, the shared secrets, and the pauses that said more than our sentences ever could. When I finally spoke, my voice was low but sure. "Then let's not make this a one-time thing." He smiled, slow and genuine, and there was a quiet promise in it. "I was hoping you'd say that." From that moment, the decision was unspoken but clear. We'd make the effort to stay in each other's lives. Not just by accident, not just when paths happen to cross, but intentionally. The stars above seemed brighter, like the night itself had shifted with us. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was the start of something neither of us had quite expected. We stood there for a moment longer than necessary, the night air cool but not uncomfortable. Streetlights painted his face in warm gold, and I could see the way his eyes softened. Neither of us moved right away, almost as if we were reluctant to let the moment end. "Good night," he finally said, his voice low, almost reluctant. "Good night," I echoed, smiling in a way I couldn't quite help. We didn't hug, didn't shake hands, didn't do anything overly dramatic. But there was something in the air, something unspoken but understood. As I turned to walk away, I felt lighter, as if my chest had been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there until tonight. On the short journey home, my mind kept replaying the evening. Not the words we said, but the little things. The way we'd laughed without holding back. The way he'd looked at me during a quiet pause, as if seeing something he liked but wasn't sure how to put into words. The small brush of his hand, when we reached for the same thing. It wasn't a grand story, but somehow it felt like it could be the start of one. When I finally got into bed, my phone lit up with one last message before I could fall asleep. "Him, I really enjoyed tonight. More than I expected to, honestly. Thank you." It was simple, but it made my stomach flutter. I typed back, "Me too. Let's do it again soon," and set the phone down, smiling into the darkness. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across my room, and another message from him. "Him, good morning. Just wanted to say again, last night was really nice." I laughed quietly to myself, the warmth of it lingering long after I set the phone aside. People didn't always mean what they said, but this felt different. This felt honest. As I went about my day, there was a quiet certainty in the back of my mind that we'd see each other again, that we'd keep finding excuses to share more evenings like that one. Maybe nothing huge would happen right away. Maybe we'd take our time. But the promise was there, tucked between casual words and shared smiles. Sometimes the best connections don't announce themselves with fireworks. They sneak in gently, disguised as simple nights and small moments, until one day you realize they've taken root. And as I thought about that, I couldn't help but smile, because sometimes the best things really do happen when you least expect them.